evening's ROI Power Hour webinar titled Private Practice Governance, What Is It, Why It Matters, and What to Look For. My name is Dr. Jennifer Nathan, and I'm co-moderating this evening session with Dr. Bob Pyatt as we are co-chairs of the ACR ROI Power Hour webinar series. Before we get started, there's just a few logistical items that we want to go over with you so that you know how to better participate in this evening's event. So when you join this evening, you join through the Zoom platform. At the very bottom of the Zoom window is the Zoom control panel, which I am circling with my cursor right here. It looks like this. There are two icons on the control panel that we want to draw your attention to. The first is the chat icon, which I'm circling here with my cursor. When you click on the chat icon, this is what you would use for technical issues. So you're having a technical problem, the chat window comes up, type in your concern, hit send, and our support staff will then be reaching out to you to help you address your issue. The second icon we want to draw your attention to is the Q&A icon. You would use this if you want to ask questions of our faculty. So click on the Q&A icon, type your question in, and hit send, and then we will see it on our end. You are welcome to submit questions at any point during the webinar. However, they will be collected and not addressed until we get to the dedicated Q&A session at the very end of the webinar. There's one other item that we do want to let you know about. This webinar is being recorded, and that also includes the Q&A session with the participant questions. So just something we want to let you know. So I'm now going to turn things over to Dr. Pyatt to introduce this evening's faculty. Dr. Pyatt?
Thank you, Jen, and welcome everybody to tonight's program. Wanted to introduce our speakers. We have our first speaker tonight, member of the faculty, is Dr. Bob Barr. Dr. Barr is a private practice neuroradiologist in Charlotte, North Carolina, and served as president of Mecklenburg Radiology Associates from 2005 to 2016. He has been a strong advocate for neuroradiology practice and has been actively involved in coding, reimbursement, and coverage policy as past chair of the ASNR, the American Society of Neuroradiology Health Policy Committee, and prior ASNR advisor to the AMA Specialty Society Relative Value Scale Update Committee, known as the RUC. He is a member of the advisory board of the Harvey L. Neiman Health Policy Institute, and he has also served as ACR counselor for the ASNR and as president of the ASNR from 2019 to 2020. As of this June 2022, he is the current chair of the Novant Health Board of Trustees, and he is president-elect of the American Board of Radiology. Dr. Elizabeth Berge attended medical school at Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and completed her residency at the Cleveland Clinic Foundation in Cleveland, Ohio. Elizabeth completed a fellowship in pediatric interventional radiology at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, as well as a fellowship in pediatric radiology with an emphasis on neuroradiology at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Dr. Lauren Nicole is CEO of Triad Radiology Associates, which is a medium-sized private practice group in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Lauren is a member of the ACR Board of Chancellors and is the current president of the North Carolina Radiological Society. She is a leader in the ACR Economics Commission, holding positions as the ACR advisor to the AMA RUC and chair of the reimbursement committee. Dr. Kurt Shoppe completed his radiology residency and fellowship in abdominal imaging at Wake Forest. Kurt lives in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area and is in practice with Radiology Associates of North Texas, where he is a board member and he chairs the Quality and Safety Committee, including the MACRA task force for the group. He also works on state and national payment policy through the ACR. Currently, he is the ACR RUC alternate, and he represents the college in all of radiology in presenting physician work values to Medicare. It is a pleasure to introduce our first speaker tonight, Dr. Kurt Shoppe. Kurt.
There we go. Appreciate it, Bob. So we're going to talk about some broad or big picture issues with private practice governance, not necessarily getting into the nitty gritty. So I want you to walk away today with an understanding that of how governance policy and group culture are absolutely linked. So It's important that I didn't say that I would give you all the examples of how they are linked. So once you buy into the fact that it's important, you will see that you will see how you can both intentionally and unintentionally mess it up. So governance structure should be dynamic and adaptable. If you put a policy in place and after seeing it in action, it produces results that you don't like or that are counter to the culture you want, then you need to change it. So governance, quite simply, is how you run or manage your group or organization. It's easy to slip into academic dissections of the many subtly different models of governance. And I'm going to leave that to you for your own entertainment or as a homemade insomnia remedy. What we're going to discuss here are big picture ideas and their consequences, because it's not immediately obvious how important a governance model is to a group. At least it wasn't to me until I was on a board. And until I was on a board of a group, I really hadn't given it much thought about how important governance was. And now it's mostly all I think about. So one of the first things you want to look at is the concentration of power and decision-making. And that can be one of a few different ways. You can have it in one person, several, or a more diffuse control. And that first one is the authoritarian model. That's when your president or your executive or a single person really has control. And that may work well for some groups, particularly small groups, or in some industries, but it can get difficult if business isn't running smoothly or people are unhappy. The executive committee is a very popular model for running medium to large size groups. Usually it's a board of group members, and that can be an analog for like a corporate board. They may be elected or representative of the group. And, you know, there are details that go into that. Are they elected to term limits? Are they representative what cohorts? For medical practices, would it be by specialty, by geographic region? And so those are important questions to answer when you're evaluating an existing governance structure or creating one for your own, is what you would want that executive committee to look like. And then how does that executive committee communicate both to and from the rest of the group? Are people working for the executive committee, or is the executive committee working for the group? And it seems like a silly question, but it's not. And how you communicate and how you structure those things very much matters. And finally, you can look at the democratic, concentration of power, as in all decisions would go to the group for a vote. And when radiology was many small independent practices, this was actually the dominant governance model for how people ran their practices. This has advantages and drawbacks. Particularly, it can get quite difficult to manage a group once a group gets to a certain size or complexity by having all votes go to group members who, just by their very nature, can't have all the information for decision making. So there's variations of each of those options for governance models. And like I said, we're going to stay very, very big picture tonight in how we look at them, but all of them have themes: accountability, representativeness, your feedback and responsiveness, or your authority gradient. And so some examples: when we talk about accountability, term limits comes to mind. It's one way to hold people accountable. If you have elected positions on an executive committee, they have term limits, 1, 2, 3 years, whatever is important and how you want to structure that group. Another example of accountability would be, how would, say, an executive committee decision be challenged or recalled by the rest of the group? What threshold do you create? Do you create like the filibuster in the United States Senate and make it a 2/3 threshold? That makes it a very high bar for the group to question the board. Or do you want the board to be beholden to the group? And then you set a very low threshold, which means that the board knows that any decisions they make need to represent the will of the group, and would thereby encourage them to get grassroots feedback, get information from the members of the group before they make any significant votes or decisions. That's one of those subtle forms of governance design that's very, very important. That accountability piece, and then how you give or how you would hold a board or an executive accountable. Another example in representativeness would be who can participate in the board. Is it just, do you have a hierarchy of members and it's only people who have been in the group a certain number of years are allowed to be on the board, or would you let anybody on the board? Do you let anybody in to see the board or see the board's proceedings? And if you limit participation in the board, how do you choose to limit it? And then how are those people chosen? Like we talked about earlier, is your board representative of specialties in either a multi-specialty group or in radiology? If you have a large private practice and you have multiple subspecialties, do you have subspecialty representatives on the board and divide it up that way? Or do you divide it up geographically? Do you divide it up by health system? How you want to structure that is important to what kind of decisions you're going to make and the influence that people can have, because you can end up with skewed representativeness. If you are a large private practice and you work for 3 different health systems, one of them is very small, do you give all 3 health systems equal representation on the board? It's not a, it seems like a small question, but it's not really when you come down to potentially difficult decisions. Then feedback and responsiveness. And this is not about surveys. This is not about, hey, am I doing a good job? Survey monkey email crap. This is about being open to receiving feedback or creating the environment where feedback is sought out, acknowledged, and valued. That's a culture piece. That's a behavior piece. That's something that you create through your actions more so than any of your words. But if you want that kind of environment where you're getting the information going up and down the authority chain, then that's something you have to intentionally create. And it takes a certain amount of responsibility to do it. And then finally, you get to the authority gradient. And this can get complex, and we're not going to delve into the details of it here, but this is essentially how you structure your hierarchy. Is the group flat? Essentially, you have shareholders and non-shareholders, and all shareholders are created equal, or do you have a tiered partnership? There are senior partners, mid-level, junior partners, people in the workup. And then how do you consider your committees? Do you have committees of jurisdiction over certain parts of the practice? Who do those committees report to? And then how you choose to structure that's important. For an example, if you have a committee that decides on quality standards for the group, who do they report to? Do they report to a staff member who then reports to the board? Do they report directly to the board? Who oversees that committee? Is it a board member or another member of the practice? Do you want the committee to be able to operate independently and then give the board their input? Or do you need the board to have control and insight into the committee? Those decisions are important, and they can influence the kind of information you get depending on the environment you have relative to your feedback and responsiveness. So a few examples here from my practice as Radiology Associate in North Texas. We have an executive committee. This is a corporate style board. And it's elected by the group members. The only unelected member of the board is the CEO, but who reports to and works for the board, essentially. Now, the way we've designed the board is to highlight its accountability to the group. So it only takes 10% of group members to vote together to bring back any board decision for reconsideration. And that is by design, is to make the board accountable to the group. We have monthly board meetings. Some groups have quarterly board meetings. Some groups do weekly phone calls just to catch up on things. It depends on how you want to do that, how deeply you want the board involved in day-to-day or week-to-week operational decisions. Our board is open to anyone in the group who wants to go, including people in the workup. So you do not have to be a partner to attend a board meeting, and you are welcome to sit in on any of them because it values transparency. And there's many other ways that you can design these things, but the point is that your policies around governance contribute to the culture of the group. So your governance structure is absolutely going to support or undermine the desired group culture in both direct ways, the accountability things, and the subtle ways, and how you communicate and whether you are open to or closed off for feedback, and whether you're supporting a flat hierarchy or a very rigid hierarchy in how people communicate and how instructions are given. And so your culture and when I say policy is culture, it's important, but your culture is not based on your rules. It's based on your behavior. And your governance and your compensation policies and things like this are critical to your group culture, whether you recognize it or not. They affect how people think, how they behave, and how they act. And they can be both empowering and alienating. So you have to choose wisely and with intention. And with that, I'm going to hand this back.
Well, thank you, Dr. Shoppy. That was a terrific introduction to our topic tonight. I'm sure it will inspire some questions. I have some of my own, and we will hear from those in the Q&A. Our next speaker, Elizabeth Berge, is going to talk to us about problem solving and lessons learned. Take it away.
Okay, I'm going to see if hopefully this works. And all right, so hopefully you can see my slides here. And I'm Elizabeth Berge. I'm the president and CEO of Quantum Imaging and Therapeutics Associates. And I'm going to try to build on Dr. Shope's presentation and go forward from there. We're a large, I guess large, 77 radiologists, 40 shareholders. So that will give you an idea kind of what perspective I'm coming from. I don't know why this is coming forward here. Sorry, blipping here. All right. Okay, so I'm supposed to be talking on lessons learned, and the biggest thing I would say is know when to move from a democratic. Most groups, small groups are democratic. Every shareholder has one vote. I can't give you an exact cutoff when that you should move from democratic to kind of a representative system. But basically, you'll know because your decision making will become stagnant. You'll have very long meetings. You may feel unsatisfied with the way that the decisions that were made, or maybe you've not made enough decisions, or you don't feel like you're just kind of churning. Then you should think about going to a representative system. For our group, we have 7 board members. We're a professional corporation. We're governed by the documents that describe the decision making that Dr. Shope had previously outlined, and our bylaws, because we're a professional corporation, their bylaws, if you're an LLC, there'll be an operating agreement, describe which decisions can be made by the board of directors, which decisions can be made by the CEO, which decisions can be made by the president, and which decisions have to be shareholder decisions. So and this is, I'm going to say, the big advantage of private practices, I think, right now in this world, as we see it with its all kinds of changes going on, is that we're agile. We don't have to go through multiple layers of management. We can make decisions very quickly if we have an agile, aligned governance system. So we have a little bit different in our governance, in that we have shareholders making the big decisions. We have quarterly shareholder meeting and monthly board meetings. We distribute all financials every quarter. We distribute all minutes every month to the board meetings. A shareholder may attend if they so choose. And frankly, we've rarely had somebody that wanted to come to an actual board meeting. And a lot of people come to the shareholder meeting. So we save those shareholder decisions for big issues like spending a lot of money, firing a shareholder, and that means firing a shareholder without cause. Taking on debt more than, in our case, $500,000. And then, we will direct things that have some type of political implications to the practice, and if we think it's going to cause unrest. So we do have a barometer and can bring anything really to the shareholders that we choose, but we try to keep it shareholder meetings streamlined. Okay, let's see next. Okay. All right, so we pay for our leadership. So I'm the president and CEO. Our bylaws allow for a non-physician CEO. But since for the last 15 years, I've served in both roles, and our company pays for my time similarly to that if I were reading studies during the day without a kind of shift differential. So I'm treated very similar to my partners because they value, I guess, what I'm doing. They haven't replaced me in 15 years, so I guess they like what's happening with the group. I personally think that when you pay for leadership, we pay for the board meetings attendance, we pay for the preparation of the financials and things that our finance committee does. We pay for all of that participation, the two finance committee, quality committees. We have standing committees in our bylaws dictate which committees are standing. A board member chairs them all, but there's a lot of participation in our committee system, and that's how we engage our radiologists in the entire governance of the practice. And those minutes are published as well, and anybody can participate in whichever committee they like, although we do try to balance it out and ask people to participate if we have a committee that's short. For some reason, quality is always short. So we've kind of gave up on high level business guys. We do have a CFO and a CPA accountant that prepares all our financials, make sure our taxes are properly paid, and make sure that if we get audited by the IRS, we'll be in good shape. But we have not had a non-physician business leader for 15 years since I took over. I guess that could go any way you want it to go. If you have a physician that's interested in the business of the practice, personally, I think that we feel it the same way. We sit in the trenches. We understand how the business of radiology is practiced as well as it's governed. And I personally think that we do a better job. So consider that. So here's an important point. You can never, we have 40 shareholders. Decisions are made all the time that, some will make some people unhappy. We are a unique kind of organization in that our shareholders are also our employees. That means we're making decisions related to their comp, related to different, what the shift differential is for the evenings or the overnights. And that is dicey. How many radiologists are going to sit in certain hospitals is even dicey. So, you've got a weird situation where, you're kind of answering to your employees and you're making decisions related to their management. Then in a normal corporation, the board would be, the CEO would answer to the board, and the CEO would have absolute power over the employees and the management that they're in. We're reversed on that. It becomes the politics of it becomes much more complex. And therefore, I think as Dr. Shope touched on, the culture therefore is very important to keep the confidence in the management high, so that when those decisions that are made that can be negatively affecting certain subsections of the corporation, that they're accepted as made in the best interest of the corporation and with a fiduciary duty to the corporation, independent of our individual fiduciary duty. And that's unbelievably hard because we make decisions related to comp, like what's the shift differential for the evening shift? Should we pay extra, for call-ins, and what should that be? So if you're on the board and you do that kind of work, you're hungry for extra hours, and you're voting for a higher level, people will look at you crossways and say, are you voting in your own interest? And so you have a representative system where, in our case, you can vote them out every 3 years, and we are opposite. It's very difficult to overturn a decision of the board. It's a supermajority, or 70% of the shareholders have to undo a decision of the board. So we think a little bit differently than my predecessor said, but we tend to have the most battles with the lifestyle people versus the money people. people that want to go home at 5 and other people who want to make more money. And we've managed to kind of shift money around and hours around to generally, I won't say everybody's happy with 77 people. Like I said, I've just come to terms with the fact that not everyone will be happy all the time, but we're making the majority of people happy most of the time. And that's the best I think we can do. We don't have people bleeding out of our practice, so I guess that's a good sign. So pivoting, this is another thing we learned. Okay, if you got to be on the alert for making a mistake. Like, we're trying to predict the future all the time. We make a decision, it might be wrong. So just be aware that it might be wrong and move on quickly. Constantly be pinging it to see whether it's the wrong decision or not. When you do make a mistake, you have to have a culture that's not seen as failure, or else people won't want to admit that there's a mistake. If they feel that they're going to be punished for making a mistake or a decision or predicting the future incorrectly, then they're going to hang on that decision overly long. And you want to be able to again leverage your ability to be agile, and nothing will slow you down as much as being afraid to pivot from a decision that you've already made. So we see them as learning opportunities, and yet we do explain to the shareholdership in detail if we've decided to change direction with a contract or with hiring a group or even a merger. So that you have to be on the alert for that mistake, and then have the group's culture be that mistake is a learning opportunity and not a failure. Okay, this is hard. We're all human, but we do our best. When you're on the board, you accept that responsibility that you're going to look out for the interest of the corporation best. The corporation's interest generally is to get the work done at the lowest price, but always with an eye on the market. So, you can't let your cases go, delay interpretation for a week in order to pay the least price, but you got to walk the balance of getting your work turned around quickly enough and yet paying enough to get it done if you're short-staffed, as many of us are right now. So we actually pay an extra fee to get the work from the day cleaned up. That allows our people to go home at 5 that want to go home at 5. And some people put have dinner with their family or whatever, take them to soccer practice and sign back on and finish up the work for the day. And so we are constantly gauging the market for that. To get the work done as cheaply as possible. But, if you have an individual on the board that does a lot of that work, they may be holding out and trying to leverage a higher price. But, those people don't last on the board, is my experience. So again, I don't want to repeat this, was already kind of said, culture is important. Transparency is critical. We are a very data-driven practice. We deliver to our radiologist partners the everyday reports on production identified by physician, and also performance of each of our different health systems. And then, of course, we have as I mentioned already, the committee system that's very active. And the board generally, with my very few exceptions, I can't even remember one recently, just basically, I would say rubber stamps the committee decisions or recommendations, I should say, because if you don't basically carry out their directives, most of the time people will fall off on participation. They have to feel like their time is worthwhile. Okay, I'm going to speak just a minute on a disruptive partner. Again, your bylaws and your contracts should detail how to deal with disruptive partners, because some people will be very frustrated if they want to lead, but they can't. Many of those people find it very difficult or impossible to follow. I think Aristotle said that in order to lead, you must be able to follow. And so you have to deal with those through your disciplinary practice, disciplinary policies that should be well detailed in your contracts, in your policies and procedures manual, and in your bylaws as well. Okay, thank you.
Well, great. Dr. Brugge, thank you. And keep your camera on and stay with us, but you can stop your slide share. I'm going to invite our other panelists to turn their cameras and mics on as well. And we'll have a brief pause here. You've touched on a lot of the key problems that come up in governance discussions. And one thing I'll say is that, it's kind of hard to, it's hard to review governance because I think people have an intuitive sense of what it is, and they have an intuitive sense of how to do it. And, in my experience, that's true a good percentage of the time. It's just those few times when something wasn't intuitive where you get into trouble. And so I would just, to our audience listening tonight, I think that's something to kind of pay attention to. I know I've sat in on a lot of these sort of talks, and, some percentage of this sounds intuitive and some isn't. So we're going to pause and sort of go through lessons learned. And I suspect that those usually are situations where something wasn't quite intuitive or didn't quite turn out the way you thought that it would. So maybe Dr. Shoppe, I'll start with you, if you can unmute and just share a lesson learned for us.
Sure. It's a great point about the intuitive versus non-intuitive. And I think I fell into that trap myself as I came into it. But I'd say one of the most important lessons I've learned from others and being on the board is, to Dr. Berge's point, is it's okay to make mistakes and use that as a kind of feedback. And so an example from what everyone has productivity policies. You're trying to make things fair. You're not trying to horsewhip people into doing more work faster as a taskmaster. That's just not how our group runs or has it ever run. Most of the productivity policies are there just to set a lower bar for fairness and essentially utilize the Hawthorne effect, in that when people know they're being monitored, they tend to moderate their behavior and avoid extremes. And so we had the productivity policy in place, and over time, very few people ever had an issue with it. But then when we did, it was some of our medical directors, leaders, people who were really valuable for the group. And the entire structure of the policy was never to come down hard. It was always you're only going to look at things when they fell out. And then when they fall out, you're trying to find a reason not to care about it. But you couldn't avoid this pattern of your leaders, your people who are CMOs of their hospital, department chairs, and others who are in the culture and in the leadership of hospital groups, the local medical culture is like, why is this? And it comes down to, we weren't accounting for their non-interpretive work in a way that represented the value they added to the group. And so instead of interpreting this as they need to work more, it's we need to rewrite the policy because it's not reflecting the culture or the value we want, because we value that work that they do. So, it's, and I tried to make that point subtly earlier, is if you put a policy in place and you get a result that you didn't expect or somehow makes you uncomfortable or challenges your values, the problem is probably not the person. The problem is the policy, and policymaking is hard, and people toss around that word very flippantly, but it's hard to construct sensible policies that get the results you want and truly reflect your core values.
Yeah, I think Dr. Berge's point about pivoting being a strength, not a weakness, really rings true. Dr. Berge, I'm going to turn to you because we have a question in the Q&A that's directed towards you. This is a person writing as a new CEO and president, asking what is the #1 lesson you've learned over the last 15 years that you can share?
I mean, for me personally, it's to get a thicker skin, to be honest, to not take personally either decisions that I in our governance, the CEO and president has very little absolute power. So I have, and the way ours is written, I have power over our non-physician employees, but I have very little over the direction of the practice, but I have influence. And so everybody knows that if I've advocated for something, I've done, I show my research and I'll present it and I'm invested in that. And if it's wrong, I picked that pivot point because, that was something that I found, wasn't intuitive, like didn't happen very quickly. And I wish I had known that earlier to not, and it wasn't so much my partners were beating me up. It was so much that I was beating myself up. So, as a new CEO, I would say, let it roll off as much as you humanly can. And most of you're going to be your biggest critic. So don't give up because you feel frustrated or unsatisfied. You're going to make a lot of really good decisions, and they're going to turn out, and over time they'll outweigh that one that didn't work out the way you had anticipated.
And that's great advice, and advice that might sound intuitive, but is really hard to practice, to let those kind of things roll off. Your group sounds a lot like mine, actually. And I think the other point that you made about just knowing when you need to go from a democratic structure to a representative structure. I mean, these aren't necessarily static things that we're talking about. I've been in my group long enough to see the transition from one to another, and we probably waited a little bit too long. I will quick note to the audience. We are paying attention to the questions that are coming in. I promise if I don't ask them now, they will come up later. So please feel free to continue to put questions in. We're monitoring them. I'm going to turn to Dr. Nicola. I doubt she ever makes a mistake, but we'll see. Dr. Nicola.
Oh my goodness, that's the furthest thing from the truth. I've definitely had to work on getting my thick skin and learning to deal with the mistakes. But as far as lessons learned, the one I was going to talk about has really been illustrated well by all of the other speakers. And our group sounds very similar to a lot of the ones where we started as a small group. It was 3 or 4 guys who would sit around a table somewhere and just make decisions about what would happen. It was very little organic structure. Everybody had a voice, and everybody could be heard. As the group grew, we ended up doing exactly what Dr. Shoppy laid out, developing an executive committee. And they did a great job setting it up. It's representative. It has representatives from each of the sections. It's got the committee chairs on it. It's really well balanced. When I took over as CEO, I'd been on the executive committee most of my time here at the practice, so I really thought we had it right. I felt like we've done this great. And then, when I took over the CEO position, I started kind of asking around the people, the other radiologists, other shareholders that weren't on that you see, how do you feel about the governance structure? And some of the answers surprised me a little bit. I was a little bit surprised to feel that kind of got the sense that some of them were felt a little disenfranchised and weren't quite as engaged. And I was trying to figure out why, because from my perspective, it was this perfect little thing that worked really well. We were agile, nimble, we could make decisions. We kind of followed all the rules. And it turns out that there just wasn't enough transparency. So to Dr. Berge's point, the medical partnership is an unusual structure of a partnership. Everyone is equal.
Uh-oh, we lost you right on everybody being equal. All right, well, we'll try to get Dr. Nicola back. While we're pausing with a technical issue, I am curious for our other 2 speakers, is there another transition that happens? We know that going from a small group that can still be run democratically to a medium-sized group that needs, more structure, an executive committee, representative governance. What happens when you get to the Radiologic Associates of North Texas size? Do you have boards within boards? What's the next iteration of that transition?
Yeah, that's it's a good question. There's a tendency in many industries, particularly in healthcare right now, to think that bigger is better. And I'm going to tell you, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So you can solve some problems with size, but you're creating others. And one of those comes down to your transparency, your buy-in. Why do people feel motivated to work? Because it's very easy to go in a small partnership. You see everybody else. You see what they do. They see what you do. You, in essence, have very clear transparency. You know how people are behaving. You know what work they're doing. There's no question of what's happening there. When you get up to 250 radiologists, you're very segmented. You don't know what others are doing. You feel disenfranchised. You feel separated. And it's very hard you have to be very intentional about trying to maintain the culture that you're looking for. And you come up and start rubbing up against some of these things that feel very corporate. And I know that corporatization in medicine can be tossed out as a pejorative, but there are corporate structures and policies that you may put in place because you need a level playing field. You have significant human resources issues once you get to that size. And so, yeah, it's difficult. For us, it's still the same board. When we bring on groups, we believe in transparency. And so that's one of those where that's why we let anybody into the board meetings. That's why if any group, as some groups affiliate or merge with RANT, they are given board seats. And depending on the size, they may or may not have a voting seat, but they have a board seat and they're there because it encourages that transparency. And it's one of those, it's something to support our kind of core mission and values, which is that we believe in private practice radiology and that we're there to support the physician. The board works for the group doesn't work for the board. And that's why that's there. And so, we'll work on additional efforts for transparency, like Dr. Nicola was mentioning. Once you've been on the board for a while, it's easy to make assumptions. That you may be functioning as a benign governing entity, but that doesn't mean that everybody else shares that perception, and perception is reality to a certain extent. And so that communication and transparency becomes even more important as you get bigger.
Because I suspect, Dr. Berg, I think our groups are, again, probably similar in size as well as structure. We're about 60 radiologists and 20 advanced practice providers. And so I think we're, kind of butting up against that. We're not quite the North Texas where you've got, spread out over a really large geographic area and that kind of size, but wondering what that next iteration looks like. And it's nice to hear that this representative, board and committee structure still works at that larger size. Dr. Nicola, it looks like we have you back. Are you working?
I think I'm back. I guess my office needs to invest more in internet connection, office supplies. Maybe we should stop paying the CEO less and the computer system more, but I think it's working now. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. Perfect. I think I finished my lesson learned, but yeah, the conclusion was, I just tried to work on being more transparent about the proceedings of the EC, making sure that the board members feel in the loop and engaged. I've worked hard on trying to point more board members to committees so that they were more actively engaged, and just tried to make sure that everybody felt like they were part of what was going on.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, if you're able to share your slides now, we will do a trial here and have Dr. Shoppe and Dr. Berge turn their cameras and speakers off and see if you can walk us through what's coming in governance structure and practice structure. What does the future look like?
Okay, if you'll give me just a second, it looks like my desktop's working again. I'm just going to switch over there because I think the connection will be better. It shouldn't take a second.
Okay. And we'll keep an eye on the questions from the audience, because we do have plenty of time for questions after you.
Okay. All right, so my job's kind of the easiest one here because I just get to talk about what I think is going to happen in the future. So I can't really be wrong. Dr. Barr said I don't make any mistakes. That's because I don't really have to commit too much here. So I'm just going to tell you what I think is some predictions for the future of the partnership. And this is really specific to private practices that have partnership tracks. A lot of private practices have the option of being an employee or a partner. Certainly as new trainees get out in the job market and they're starting to look at different job options, it's important to know the difference when you're looking at a job in the partnership track, the employee track, and what's the best fit for you. But to talk about what's going to happen in the future, I think that we have to sort of level set to some of the changes that have gone on in the structure of the partnership and what the typical private practice partnership has looked like over the years. And I think, yeah, 15, 20 years ago, a private practice partner was sort of a Swiss Army knife. It was a jack of all trades. It was a radiologist who probably could do multiple specialties, could do some procedures, could do a little bit of everything. Before radiology was 24/7, 200 studies on the list at any given moment. Their hours were pretty set. Everybody showed up about the same time every day. Everybody left about the same time every day. So the job description looked pretty similar for all of the people that worked there. So all the partners were pretty uniform, could do a little bit of everything. Most people didn't have to tackle the overnight shift. 15, 20 years ago, there really wasn't much need. The ER guys read their stuff and everything else was taken care of in the morning. So again, the shifts were very similar amongst the people in the partnership. And then, in the last 5 to 10 years, there's really been a rapid acceleration of the changes in the structure of radiology practices. And in many ways, one of those is AI. Now we've got computers helping, a huge volume of data that we're looking at that we didn't used to. Remote work has kind of transformed radiology, specifically in the post-pandemic era, although even before COVID, people were starting to develop some home reading opportunities and home workstations. So now, instead of this kind of practice of people that all looked the same, worked the same shifts, did the same things, very equal and fair in many, many ways, now we have a much more diverse workforce in our private practices and even in the partnership structure. So we have people that are working different hours. We have people that are doing subspecialty work only and not other types of practices. We have people that, like Dr. Shapi said, that only serve certain hospitals, other people that serve other hospitals within the network. So varying degrees of things that people do. So you really have to think about how to define a partner. And in this new world of where the roles look different, the hours look different, everything else look different, how can you make that fair amongst the shareholders? So I think the question that every group has to define for itself is this one: what does it mean to be a partner? So that's kind of what it comes down to. It is not going to be the same answer for every group. It's going to depend on a million different factors that are unique to each group. But at the end of the day, the group has to decide what are the core things that for us define partnership when we're deciding how to term that in our governance structure and in our practice. Does it mean people that are willing to take the overnight shift? I have some people that I know in private practice, the partners cover their own overnights. And if you're not willing to do that, you can't be a partner. In my practice, historically, the partners cover the ER shift on some weekends. So if you are a neuroradiologist or a MSK radiologist who doesn't want to read general body CT, then it's a little harder for you to fit in the ER, or I'm sorry, in the partnership structure that we've always had. Now the question is, as we've evolved into this kind of new structure of people that do different things and look very different, do those definitions change over time? I would argue that we do have to evolve as practices, and we have to consider the different contributions that people make, and not everyone's going to be as cookie cutter as they have been sometimes in the past. So the partnership, we talked about some of the things that it could be, some of the things maybe it's not necessarily. I think people get bogged down in fairness when we're talking about partnership, and I know that's something that my group has struggled with a lot. And a lot of the times that we have contention among, what should this person be a partner, or is this appropriate for the partnership? A lot of the times it's about perceived unfairness. And it's difficult to make everyone fair when there's so many different versions of what the radiologist looks like. Is it fair that someone works evening shifts and someone doesn't? Is it fair that the IR people don't have as much chance to work from home as everyone else? Is it fair that the breast people have to go to these far out locations in the community hospitals? What can you do to make that more fair? And at the end of the day, you're probably not going to get very close to having everybody be fair. One thing that I tend to rely on, and one thing that I remind people in our practice when we really get caught up on the concept of fairness and unfairness, that to me, partnership, the best definition of partnership is ownership. And the difference between a partner and employee is ownership. You own that practice. Saying is that nobody washes a rental car, right? So when it comes down to at the end of the day, the people that are going to stay late, the people that are going to read the list when it needs to, the people who are going to pitch in, do the extra go the extra mile for the practice are the ones that have that ownership in it. And that may look different. It may look different in a bunch of different ways. You know, there's controversy in a lot of practices I know on should they make the Nighthawk people partners? Should they be able to be partners? Well, in the traditional sense, you know, the picture I showed of all the people that looked exactly the same, those people wouldn't qualify as partners. But, you know, are they contributing in the same way that other people are? Do they, you know, have that sense of ownership? Are they, you know, there when the practice needs them? Or, you know, I think that there's different ways where you can really define the partnership. And to me, it comes down to, is there a sense of ownership? It's more of a mentality than it is a job description. And I'll just finish here by saying that, you know, this is my opinion, but my opinion is that I think for practices to become successful, and particularly right now we're in a market where, you know, every practice I know is hiring. They're trying to, you know, hire multiple different positions. And so I think that the only way for our practices to grow is to change a little bit, and to change in a way that the partnerships are a little more inclusive, and that we're a little more thoughtful about expanding our definition of what a partner looks like, of expanding the flexibility options that we have for all the different things that we talked about, of where the person's working, of the hours that the people are working, of the job description, and really base it more on the kind of loyalty and the ownership structure, ownership mentality, more so than any specific job description. So those are my pontifications. I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Barr, and I think we're going to do some Q&A.
Well, gosh, thank you. That is terrific. And I'm going to remember that nobody washes a rental car, and that's going to remind me about partnership and ownership. And I really think that you kind of touched on a really important thing. I mean, that we're desperately all trying to grow and recruit, and we recognize that the nature of the folks that we're recruiting are making us more diverse practices. And I can't help but think that in some way, having a strong and effective governance structure not only makes us more competitive in our primary business, but more competitive with regard to recruiting, and makes us more attractive to potential folks looking for jobs. And so maybe we could be thinking about some ideas about what people should be looking for, and how do they know they're joining a group that has an effective governance structure. But I'm going to hold that thought and turn to our other speakers and hear their reflections on where we're headed and what the future might look like. And I'll start with you, Dr. Shopie.
Yeah, that's a tough question. You know, for the most part, I agree with Dr. Nicola that it's a continual evolution. And I think what's important is that you be willing to take the feedback. So, you know, feedback gets a cliched consideration for most people. And so when I say that feedback, I'm talking about market feedback. When you're recruiting and people aren't coming to your group, you know, don't take the classic private practice line of, they don't know what they're missing, I can't believe they didn't pick us. And perhaps you should reconsider your offers, the face you're presenting to the world. And these people are providing you feedback, but are you willing to take it? Do you see it for what it is? And that goes for the same thing when you're dealing with patients in your outpatient imaging centers, your own staff, your hospitals that you work for. They will give you both direct feedback and indirect feedback. And I think it's important that you have an expansive enough consideration of, while you may do some things well, you do other things poorly, and always be on the lookout for that indirect feedback, because if you're open to it, it'll probably help you avoid trouble in the future, so you don't get into desperate circumstances, which will require emergent meetings, extra work for everybody, and all sorts of sturm and drang.
And Dr. Shopie, what parlay that into your thoughts about the future? What might be what do you see for practices next 5 or 10 years?
I think that it's that you adapt or die. So you're in a changing healthcare market. As far as people who are coming out of training, as far as the way that the workplace is evolving and people's considerations and relationship to their work. And so if you insist on doing things like you did in 1985 or 1995, when your current leadership may or may not have been joining the group, then I think you're going to have a tough time. That it's going to be a time that probably rewards people who take a more progressive approach to employment, to the nature of work and how they consider it, and their ability to adjust, adapt, and overcome.
Thank you. Dr. Brugge, how about thoughts about the future? What do you see coming in your world?
Sure. So I think that, I mean, I'm old enough to have been at the alternators and the big reading room, big open reading rooms where, you kind of knew what all your partners were doing, and we were in one place and there was no home workstations. And so we had a different level of collegiality, not just amongst ourselves, but amongst the clinicians as well, where they couldn't look at the images anywhere else, but come down and, we would go hunt them up and have a conversation about their families. We knew how many kids they had and all that. So that's gone. And it's not coming back. So what we've done is try to develop tools that help us manage and put in different metrics than the old metrics. I mean, the old metrics, the RVU, right? So RVU is a bad metric for productivity, in my opinion. I'm a pediatric radiologist, and so, it's very difficult to rack and stack RVUs doing VCUGs and bone ages and scoliosis surveys. So, all work is not created equally, and yet we still need to be able to manage people who are all over, in our case, the country, providing services and making sure that we're being responsible. So as we recruit, to Dr. Shopey's point, I show all of and we had an interview today, and I had all my graphs and charts and things that I showed our potential new hire to show to present to him that we are responsible in our management, because yes, we're owners, but I'm sorry, with 40 of us, we cross the humanity spectrum. We've got the hard workers and we've got the ones that will slide by. I mean, it's just a fact. And so, we feel that we have to use tools and charts and metrics and make them very transparent and have certain standards with fair metrics. And so we're moving away from, and I see the future being moving away from the older metrics and moving into newer metrics and newer ways to award time for that non-interpretive tasks that you've already, Dr. Shopey had already commented upon. And we have a time-based metric now that accounts for non-interpretive tasks, including phone calls, et cetera, to try to get a better idea of everyone's contribution and making sure that Hawthorne effect is leveraged, because it is an effective tool. I know we don't like it. I know we all think that we should be all responsible, hitting, doing all the work that we possibly can, but it's just, even if it was true, I feel that some people's perceptions would be that it isn't. So I feel that we've had to kind of leverage the technology that's now available to us to manage our practice responsibly, and then prove it to not only our partners, but also our new recruits and the health systems as well. And I provide all kinds of reports to our health systems to prove to them, to bang home to them the level of service that we provide and the privilege that they have in having us providing the services. And I also bang home to them that I believe that a lot of that is because we are private, and we do have that a standard that may be different, or maybe not a standard, but more of a loyalty and responsibility and sense of ownership and pride in providing those types of services to them. And I found, one of my partners taught me this about a decade ago: if you say things with enough times with conviction, a lot of people will believe it. And if you put a chart in front of them and say that it says the same thing, it's even better. So that's what I've what I see as the future is more data analytics and more tools to help us prove our worth.
Well, and I think those are really important because some of those low reimbursed things you talk about, at least low in the RVU world, are part of what make you harder to replace. You know, it's the on-site, hands-on work, in addition to administrative things that also make you harder to replace because you're invested in the hospital and you're acting like an owner. So great points. I'm going to turn to some of we're getting great questions. They're not too difficult to try to categorize them on the fly. So I'm going to go in more of a random order. Our first question asks, and this is to any of our panelists, are the president and medical director also performing clinical duties, and how do you divide that time? How much, maybe I'll sort of rephrase it to, how much administrative time do leaders in your group get? And is it just the president, or are there others who get administrative time?
So I'll jump in. So our group president has very highly variable admin time. They cover shifts, but they need to be free for a lot of the admin work. So it's probably in the realm of 60-40 admin clinical. Now we have system level vice presidents that are members of the board that handle 1, 2, or 3 large contracts, and they also get a certain set of admin days, and then certain committee chairs will get admin days. Like when I was the quality chair, so as a board member, I didn't have any dedicated admin time except for when I needed to go to board meetings. But as a quality chair, I got a day a month that was set aside. I could split up as needed to handle just because there was certain meetings I needed to have during the day with certain staff and other stuff. So I think it's ours is very flexible. If we have people in there or they make requests or the board decides that this is important for the practice, we distribute administrative time to those people to get those things done in a way that's telling them we value you and this work, get it done so you don't have to do it in the middle of the night or on the weekend.
Great. And this is one probably is helpful to hear some other perspectives from each, just kind of quick administrative time. Dr. Nicola.
Yeah, my group's very, for a long time, has been forward thinking enough to try to dedicate time for the CEO. So my spread's probably 70-30-ish. And for the same reasons Kurt said, it's hard for me to have like, you work Tuesdays and Thursdays at the breast clinic. I'm a breast imager, just because things come up on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So generally I have a PACS in my administrative office. So when I'm not doing things, I hop on and help out on the list. If we're super behind, I'll hop on and help out on the list. So it's really not a structured time on, time off, kind of do both jobs. But I really do appreciate the investment that my group has put into trying to carve out time for me to not just attend the meetings and do the things, but really have some whiteboard time too, because part of my job is leading the group and planning strategy and coming up with things other than just sitting through Zoom meetings. So that's how we do it. We do have committees. We have a clinical operations committee. We have a finance committee, a manpower committee, ethics committee. Each of those have committee chairs. They get variable amount of admin time. A lot of that's unfortunately based on what our manpower situation is. So lately they haven't been getting a lot of admin time. But if they have a meeting that they need to go to or something they need to do, the practice is pretty good about rearranging off days so that they can have the admin time that they need. Thank
you. And Dr. Berge, I know you framed it in terms of pay. Is that different than awarding of admin time? Do you think about that differently, or how does it work in your group?
So no, I meant to in terms of committee participation, we pay for participation in the committee. If there's a meeting, that's reimbursable via CHIT system. And also if you're charged with doing any research as part of that committee, you're told you have 2 hours to do this, you can be paid back for that. So we're pretty generous in our efforts to include as many shareholders as possible to seek that not just brain power, but also investment into the company. As far as me personally, we actually have 2 corporations. Our non-professional fee generating income is in one, an LLC, and I'm the CEO of that, and then also the professional corporation. And I'm also our only pediatric radiologist in the entire practice. So We have a fairly, unfortunately, growing pediatric responsibilities. So I'm more of a consultant. I don't really sit in a seat anymore. But I do read 2 or 3 cases that are sent to me every day, including in the middle of the night, unfortunately. But yeah, so I mean, I basically am full-time admin, accepting consulting.
Okay, thank you. Also, we had a question, and this is, I'm going to come back to it because this is what I had teased earlier. The question was red flags pertaining to governance that you suggest trainees look out for when looking for their first job. And, you know, that sort of fits into my question of, and in fact, the title of our talk, you know, what to look for. How do you know when you're interviewing with a group that they're well governed? What questions would you even ask that, you know, I mean, if somebody came and said, is your group well governed? You know, I don't get asked that question a lot. So how would a trainee know, and what should they ask, or what should they look for?
Yeah, when you were talking about that earlier, Bob, it made me think we've interviewed 3 or 4 people in the last couple of weeks, and none of them asked, none of them even mentioned it. So it wasn't even in their thoughts. What I always try to explain to them, so that they understand what's going on. But I feel like it's really, there's so many other things that they have on their mind that the governance doesn't cross their mind, even though I think arguably it's one of the more important features of a private practice that you're joining. Red flags, I think, is if you asked a partner and they didn't know. That would be the biggest red flag, is I'm not really sure, or I don't know, or the decisions you're just made. Yeah, I think that a big group that doesn't have some sort of decision-making body, a 50-person group that's like, oh, we're a democracy, and anybody who votes no, then it's shot down. That's not a group that's going to be able to make agile decisions very well. Or the opposite end of that, I think a red flag would be, we've got this dictator who is a one-man show. There's completely no representatives from this or that section, and the decisions seem to be asymmetric. So I think number one, ask the question, and number two, try to find something that's something that seems reasonable moderation.
Yeah, I used to joke that my own group was democratic to a fault, and until I realized that it wasn't even funny anymore, and we fixed it. So, but yeah, I think those are great, and I strongly agree. To those who are out looking, and I know this tonight's talk isn't just to that group, but definitely ask questions. I don't get asked enough questions either when people come and interview, and I think asking about how the practice is run is good for a lot of reasons.
I try to make interviewees comfortable with asking uncomfortable or inappropriate questions. I start the interview with that, but I think your best play as an interviewer in sorting that out is you're going to have to get things by inference and sort out, to Dr. Nicola's point, like, do they even know how decisions are made, or can they share it? Are they willing to share it? So you get some insights into transparency. And this is when you're interviewing with the group president or somebody who's listed as a board member or committee chair. Those are the kind of people. If you're interviewing with a regular group member, they may or may know, you better be careful. They could be an ex-president and are not on any of these committees anymore, but know all of it. And they'd be a great person to discuss it with. But getting to some of these questions in an interview, probably the best way is roundabout and not necessarily direct.
Yeah. Next question.
One more thing I forgot to say. Another red flag, I think, is if you look at the board and it's all the senior members of the group, like everybody's 64 years old.
Great point.
And have been there for 20 years.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Our EC has term limits every 2 or 3 years, depending on what the role is. A new person's in there. We have a 9-member EC. I'd say 6 of the 9 are 45 or younger. So we really try to make an effort to put the people that are steering the vision of the group, the people that are going to be there the longest. So I think that's an important one too.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
There's a great question here. How do you motivate those in the group to participate in committees and leadership? And I guess I'll modify the question to say, do you want to motivate everybody in the group to be doing leadership? How have your groups tackled this?
So I guess
go ahead.
Well, one of the things is, and I touched on this in my talk, is to make sure that you better have a really good reason to fail to carry out a recommendation from one of the committees, because that's the fastest way for them to lose interest if they feel like their time and energies are not well spent. So and if on the rare occasion that we have not taken a recommendation, we've actually gone to the next committee meeting and explained, where the problems were and what information they didn't have when they made that decision, and to try to be very respectful of their time and energy would be one way that we, and then of course we do pay for it. And then, but we toyed with term limits as well, but we would not have enough people, honestly, on our board. Right now, we have 2 people dropping off. Our elections happen in our annual meeting, as determined by our bylaws in December, and so we'll have 2 seats up, and we have already put out, the notice that those 2 seats are going to be open, and we haven't had anyone step up yet. And we've actually gone, to be honest, we've even called some people up and said, hey, are you interested? And we're really struggling. People are just, in our practice, we are short, and they're working really hard. And it's hard to, I don't think they feel that that they wouldn't be, respected in that position, but they're just tired. To be honest, I think it's sad that that's the case.
I do think that you have to groom leadership to an extent. Sometimes your best leaders are a little bit of reluctant leaders, and they may not raise their hand, but if you identify that they have potential and speak to them, I think they'll usually surprise you with how great a job they can do. So.
Yeah, we are putting together, because of this and anticipating this problem, we're putting together what does it mean to be on the board? What do you have to do? What are your responsibilities? Just because, for that exact reason, in case there's some people that aren't stepping up because they're worried that it's going to be overburdensome, or they're going to be, afraid to stick their neck out. So we're working on that. I appreciate what you said.
Yeah, most groups don't want a leader who wants to be a leader. Aside from, it's another great question. Aside from EC, what are the core committees that a medium to large size practice needs to have?
That comes down to really how you want to divide labor for your group. If you're going to frame them out, I think an important one to have that's independent and has a lot of participation is your physician evaluation committee. You can call it peer review, physician evaluation. We have a physician evaluation committee that's there to evaluate physicians specifically. And an offshoot of that is the medical peer review committee, and that's different. We have quality and standards, and then we have certain subcommittees that report up through quality. Standards reports to quality, and then there are some others under quality. And then we have operations that has regionalization that reports up through ops that reports to the board. And I'm trying to see our structure, chart in my mind, but the quality, physician evaluation, and ops are critical. Oh, and then another big part of it is kind of our community beneficence committee. It's where we dedicate our resources to investing back into the community, certain charities, and how we participate with other organizations. There are many, many other smaller subcommittees, and I'm not even getting into subspecialty sections, medical director committees and all the rest of that, because some of that comes with size,
Sure.
But come to your core committees under quality, your expectations there, your physician evaluation component, and ops.
Right. And I know, I'll just remind people, JACR has had great references on governance. So people, you can go to that and search governance. You'll see some great references. And I know the committees that, the 3 that are always mentioned are a finance committee, an operations committee, and a new business committee. But I agree there, we get new ones all the time. We have work list committees, and I would say recruiting committee has to be by far and away one of the most important ones. What about others? Dr. Berge or Nicola? Did we hit the main ones?
Yeah, that's pretty much what we have. We have a quality committee. We have a finance committee. We have a professional standards committee, like Dr. Shoppy said. We do have a person power committee, and operations. I think I hit them all. But there's task forces, like you said. There's things that pop up all the time that we make.
Right.
People.
Right. We have standing committees and we'll have a task force if we have some new idea about something that we're not quite sure it's mature to the point of a committee. But
task force, work groups, issue specific groups of people who will attack, and we'll usually have a blend of physicians and staff on that, including potentially outside counsel, consultants, or others who will participate depending on the issue.
And we also have an IT committee. I forgot to mention that. So, we have a fairly sophisticated, for our size group, IT, non-physician IT fraction of the group, but we wanted to give them some physician guidance and leadership. So we created an IT committee to work in tandem with the non-physician IT team. So it's another one we have.
Do any of you have hospital administrators on any of your committees?
No.
We do.
They may have once worked there and now work for us, but no, not a live administrator participating on a group committee. No, we participate on many of theirs.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We have had hospital administrators come to our shareholders meetings on occasion to make a presentation, or to have a panel discussion regarding an issue that we're facing, but none that are our standing members.
Okay. Next question: How do you deal with older radiologists who want to hold on to power? I'm not completely sure what that's referring to. I assume that's not just people who are staying on in a clinical capacity, but are still holding on to some sort of governance or leadership power. Has that been an issue?
So our contracts actually require surrendering your shareholdership at 65. It does not require you to no longer be an employee, but because the corporation's health most often aligns with younger radiologists, we made a decision to do that in our practice. But basically, they wouldn't be able to hold on to it if they couldn't be elected, because they're all elected offices. So as long as they're elected, I think you pretty much are protected, unless your practice is so old that they have a majority of the voting presence.
Yeah, it's the elected issue usually sorts that out, because I think that's what the question is getting at. We also have a retirement age where you have to surrender shareholdership, but if we have radiologists still functioning at full shareholder level, at that level, we change their compensation package to make sure that they're compensated the equivalent of a shareholder, and would structure their bonus the same as what the distribution would be for a shareholder. But it's essentially, that's a piece in there to protect the practice in case there is, issues that come up that are specific to age.
Great.
Yeah, this is the same. We are when we hit that 65, the comp doesn't change. It's just you basically can't vote.
We have two questions that are related about remote work. One asks questions about how boards can encourage or mandate on-site as opposed to remote work, and a related question: just how do we handle remote work? How is it compensated? And I guess I would break that into, are we talking about daytime or call? And you can feel free to specify.
I think this is probably one of the biggest questions that the radiology groups are going to have to tackle in the coming couple of years. Anybody who's tried to recruit, that's one of the first questions that people ask you is how many shifts can I do from home, or what percentage of people are working from home. I think a lot of people got a taste of it during COVID. People realized they like reading at home in their pajamas. They like some of that flexibility. And so it's a big demand. And right now the market is such that people can ask for pretty much anything they want. So we have to figure out how those people incorporate into our practice. Our group has hired some remote readers just to offset some of the volume. The question is, and it goes back to what I said before about how do you define partnership? Because if you're giving some of that, the outpatient work, the non-stat work, whatever people can do from home easily, what's left for the people on site? And then how do you make that still valuable? Is a partner now just someone who does fluoro studies sitting in a chair at a community hospital? They're not getting to do their subspecialty work because it's easy for somebody to read MSK knees, from wherever they happen to be sitting. So you have to, I think, tread pretty carefully when you're trying to do that. But you also have to recognize that that's kind of the way that we're moving as a profession. And, we need people on site for face-to-face time. We don't want to commoditize ourselves. My personal opinion is we also don't need 32 people sitting in a reading room in my hospital when you need people for consults and to do procedures. You probably don't need a lot of those redundant people that, you could potentially be making higher job satisfaction and your workforce happier, higher morale if you were to offer some flexibility. So all that to say, I don't have the answers, but I think it's something that practices have to look at. Some practices I know have gotten together and decided what a discount is for someone who wants to work X percentage from home. So they've given a monetary discount for people who don't want to come on site. That's one way to do it. We talked a little bit about kind of the partnership versus employee status for people that don't come on site. The answer is going to be different for every practice, but if they haven't started thinking about it, I would encourage them to.
You're not going to have an option. You're going to have to think about it and sort it out. That's one of those feedback things that the market's going to do for you, is push that decision making onto you. There's lots of ways to tackle that. There's no right answer. It depends on your group, depends on what your hospital coverage needs to be, your outpatient centers. I would encourage people to approach it with an open mind, not a fixed, we've done it this way, it needs to be done this way kind of mindset. You can rotate people through hospitals very successfully, and you can do it with a very minimal on-site presence if you do it with the right attitude and the right coverage. And that person on site is going to be making everybody happy that they're there, while the other people need to get it done. And so while some people take a discount for remote work, one of the things we've looked at is having productivity expectations for remote work be higher than on-site work, because that on-site work is going to involve a lot of stuff where they're making people happy to have you have the contract at that hospital, which is going to, by necessity, not be interpretive revenue generating work. And that's a trade-off that people are just going to have to accept.
Yeah, I mean, we have a very clear, and again, this is something we may have to pivot from, but we have an answer that we're working with right now, which is we pay by the hour. So our shifts are 9 hours long. If you drive in, you get an extra hour work, no matter how far you drive. And we also have productivity expectations, a very clear bar. You're not allowed to work at home unless you hit that bar. And that's how and if you can never come in, like you live in another state or whatever, you're not allowed to be a partner. We have quite a few, well over 20 teleradiologists, employed teleradiologists, some of whom work other jobs. To be honest, they're partners with other practices, and that's what we're doing right now. And this is the first year that we'll have it instituted the entire year. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects our distributions at the end of the year and whether it's successful or not. But it's one of those things that we're watching because it may be too much or not enough. I'm not sure. I can't say that it's successful at this point in time, but that's what we're doing.
We have just a couple minutes for one more quick question, and I'll read this question. It's from Alan K. As leaders in your practice, are you seeing a shift in priorities of radiologists from maximization of income to work-life balance? And how is that reflected in the willingness to participate in governance and the decisions of the governing bodies? And
first question, they want the work-life balance and the income, if I'm going to judge by what the recruiting feedback and discussions have been. Because right now, people are so desperate for humans that are trained in radiology that they are giving insane offers. So that being said, now willingness to participate in governance and decisions, that's tough. Like people who have come out into this on fire job market just haven't gotten to the point where they're taking leadership positions elsewhere, except for some of our mammographers. when they come in, they may start rotating in and having to be the lead at a center at some point. And we have found that some of them don't want to. So that was something that was a surprise to us. We considered it a acknowledgement of your training and seniority. And so that's something that we have now had to kind of take a step back and look at more carefully. Is not everybody is interested in owning a center, owning a hospital, and doing it. And so it's been interesting to try to sort that out on the front end.
But, again, people may not know that they're interested or that they'll like it, but that is part of the special sauce of what makes a private practice radiology group is, and I think that it can be a very rewarding part of one's career. And it's something that is in some ways unique to the type of practices we've been talking about tonight, the independent private practice. Dr. Nicola.
I was just going to say that, I think that the fact that there are more opportunities than ever for people to join practice models that aren't private practice, and that they're taking those opportunities, is evidence of that question being true. I mean, there's way more employee positions out there, work for a corporate radiology company or an employed position in a hospital, and people are taking those jobs. So we get a skewed view of people that come to private practice who probably are more interested in the committee work and the ownership. But I think it's probably a trend that work-life balance is more important, and some people are perfectly happy to do their job and then go home and not have to worry about it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a place for those people to work in this current job market too. So there's a little bit of that. In my practice, I've seen less of the willingness to participate in committees and practice building, and more of the people really want their defined work day. Like, they don't love staying late, or they don't love adding extra, after hour shifts and weekends. There's been more pushback to that than there has been to the kind of practice building stuff.
I'll say something really quickly about that. But in general, I see a dichotomy of we have a huge standard deviation in our income in our practice based on how much people want to work. And I think that as long as your income is above a certain level, you have to hit that bar for the people who want to work, basically day shifts. So you have to have enough, your practice has to be successful enough to be able to pay them enough to keep them. But then you have enough left over, basically, so that those people that want to be generating like very large amounts of money because they're working very hard also have that capacity. So we've kind of been able to walk the line pretty well to keep that income of the day workers, then their partners, day partners, at a level that they're comfortable with, and yet still have enough left over to feed the guys that are very hungry.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to leave it there and thank all of our faculty. You guys were terrific. I'll hand it back over to Dr. Pyatt for some closing words. Thanks very much.
Okay. We can go to the final slide there, please. On behalf of Jen, Nathan, and I, we would like to thank everyone for attending tonight's superb program on private practice governance. We got a lot of great information, a lot of experience, a lot of advice, a lot of insight into where all of this is going. So thank you, everyone, for attending, and a big special thanks for all of our faculty this evening. Just as a reminder, please share your feedback with us. We will send the post-webinar survey and a recording of tonight's program out next week. The next Power Hour topic will be Stories of Leadership, Initiatives, and Impact. This will be held on Tuesday, October 18th at 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. You can register for this and other upcoming RLI Power Hour webinars at acr.org/Power Hour. Again, everyone have a nice evening, and thank you for our faculty's superb presentation this evening. Good night.